When demolition crews tore down the abandoned Blackwood Manor in rural Georgia during the winter of 1923, they uncovered a network of underground chambers that revealed one of America's most disturbing family legacies. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Hidden beneath the grand estate's marble floors lay evidence of a multi-generational conspiracy that had terrorized the local community for over 60 years, leaving a trail of missing persons, unexplained deaths, and dark rituals that challenged everything historians thought they knew about wealthy Southern families in the post-Civil War era. The discovery began when construction workers, breaking through the manor's foundation, noticed an unusual hollow sound echoing from beneath the main ballroom. What they found defied explanation: a series of interconnected tunnels leading to chambers filled with human remains, occult artifacts, and detailed journals documenting decades of ritualistic activities conducted by successive generations of the Blackwood family. The Georgia State Historical Commission immediately sealed the site, and for nearly a century, the full extent of the Blackwood family's crimes remained hidden from public knowledge. The trail that led investigators to understand the true scope of the Blackwood family's sinister legacy began not in Georgia, but in the archives of the Savannah Public Library, where genealogist Margaret Foster was conducting routine research on prominent Southern families when she stumbled upon newspaper clippings that painted a disturbing pattern of disappearances spanning 3 generations. Cornelius Blackwood established the family estate in 1847 on 2,000 acres of prime agricultural land in what is now Whitmore County, Georgia. The imposing Gothic Revival mansion, constructed with materials imported from Europe, stood as a testament to the family's immense wealth derived from cotton plantations and railroad investments. Local residents initially welcomed the Blackwoods as benefactors who brought employment and prosperity to the struggling post-war region. The family appeared to embody Southern aristocratic ideals. Cornelius served on the county council and donated generously to local churches and schools. His wife Eleanor organized charity events for war widows and orphans, while their children received the finest education available in the South. The Blackwood name became synonymous with respectability, influence, and civic responsibility throughout the region. However, beneath this carefully cultivated public image lay a family tradition far more ancient and sinister than anyone in Whitmore County could have imagined. The journals discovered in the underground chambers revealed that the Blackwood family had been practicing forms of ritual magic and human sacrifice for generations, beliefs they had brought with them from their ancestral home in Scotland and adapted to their new circumstances in the American South. Cornelius Blackwood's private writings, found sealed in a lead-lined chest buried beneath the estate's chapel, described his belief that the family's wealth and power were maintained through what he called blood covenant rituals. These ceremonies, conducted during specific lunar phases and seasonal transitions, required human sacrifices to ensure the continued prosperity of the Blackwood lineage and their business ventures. The selection process for these sacrificial victims followed a disturbing pattern that investigators were able to trace through cross-referencing the family's journals with local missing person reports spanning 6 decades. The Blackwoods typically targeted individuals who would not be immediately missed by the community: drifters passing through the county, runaway slaves during the antebellum period, and later, recently freed slaves and poor white families who had fallen into debt. Eleanor Blackwood's correspondence with her sister in Charleston provided insight into the family's recruitment methods. She described hosting elaborate dinner parties and community gatherings where the family would identify potential victims among the guests. Those deemed suitable for their purposes would be invited to return for private meetings or overnight stays at the manor, after which they would simply vanish without explanation. The most chilling aspect of the Blackwood operation was their use of the local community's trust and respect to facilitate their crimes. Cornelius leveraged his position on the county council to influence law enforcement investigations into missing persons, ensuring that searches were either never conducted or quickly abandoned. The family's charitable donations to local churches provided them with moral cover that made accusations against them seem impossible to believe. Thomas Mitchell, the Whitmore County Sheriff from 1851 to 1867, maintained detailed records of missing person reports that were discovered in the county courthouse basement during a renovation project in 1985. These records, which had been deliberately misfiled and forgotten, documented over 40 disappearances during Mitchell's tenure alone, with notations indicating that the sheriff had been instructed to cease investigations by order of the county council. The underground chambers beneath Blackwood Manor revealed the physical evidence of these crimes in horrifying detail. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The largest chamber, directly beneath the main ballroom, contained an altar carved from black granite and surrounded by carved symbols that local historians later identified as Celtic and Germanic occult markings. The walls were lined with alcoves containing human skulls arranged according to apparent ritual significance, with separate sections for men, women, and children. Archaeological examination of the remains found in these chambers confirmed that the victims had died under circumstances consistent with ritualistic execution. Evidence of restraints, specific patterns of bone trauma, and the positioning of the remains suggested that the killings had followed elaborate ceremonial procedures designed to maximize the victim's suffering and terror before death. Dr. Samuel Richardson, a forensic anthropologist from the University of Georgia, who examined the remains in 1924, documented evidence of torture methods that appeared to combine elements of medieval European practices with influences from African, spiritual traditions that the family may have encountered through their interactions with enslaved populations. His report, classified by state authorities and only released in 1987, described systematic mutilation and evidence of prolonged captivity that indicated victims were held for extended periods before being sacrificed. The journals kept by successive generations of Blackwood family members provided unprecedented insight into the psychological framework that sustained their criminal activities over decades. Each generation viewed their participation in these rituals not as criminal acts, but as sacred family responsibilities necessary to maintain their prosperity and social position. Eleanor Blackwood's diary entries describe the indoctrination process used to prepare younger family members for participation in the rituals. Children were gradually exposed to increasingly disturbing activities, beginning with attendance at minor ceremonies and progressing to direct participation in the selection and capture of victims. By adulthood, family members had been conditioned to view human sacrifice as a normal and necessary aspect of maintaining the family's power and wealth. The family's wealth allowed them to maintain this operation through multiple means of concealment and protection. They employed a network of associates throughout the region who assisted in identifying potential victims, disposing of evidence, and influencing local authorities when investigations threatened to expose their activities. Financial records discovered in the underground chambers showed regular payments to law enforcement officials, judges, and local business leaders who provided protection and cooperation. Virginia Blackwood, daughter of Cornelius and Eleanor, expanded the family's criminal enterprise during the 1870s by establishing connections with similar occult practitioners in other southern states. Her correspondence, written in coded language that investigators eventually deciphered, described a network of wealthy families engaged in ritual practices that extended from Georgia to Louisiana, with regular exchanges of victims, techniques, and ritual knowledge. The family's influence over local religious institutions proved crucial to maintaining their cover. Reverend James Crawford, pastor of the Whitmore County Methodist Church from 1855 to 1881, received substantial donations from the Blackwood family in exchange for his cooperation in providing spiritual cover for their activities. Crawford's private journals, discovered in the church archives, revealed his knowledge of the family's true nature and his complicity in helping them maintain their respectable public image. The Civil War period provided the Blackwood family with increased opportunities for their criminal activities, as the chaos and displacement of the era made it easier for people to disappear without investigation. Union deserters, Confederate stragglers, and freed slaves seeking work all became targets for the family's recruitment efforts. The journals from this period describe Virginia Blackwood's excitement about the increased availability of victims and her development of new techniques for luring people to the manor. Local folklore from the period, collected by historians in the 1930s, contained numerous stories about the Blackwood estate that residents had been afraid to discuss openly during the family's lifetime. Former slaves and their descendants spoke of strange lights and sounds emanating from the manor at night, of people entering the estate and never being seen again, and of family members who displayed an unnatural knowledge of personal secrets and private conversations. Margaret Foster's research revealed that the pattern of disappearances around the Blackwood estate had been noted by several individuals over the years, but attempts to investigate or publicize these concerns had been systematically suppressed. A traveling minister named David Hughes wrote to state authorities in 1863, describing his suspicions about the family, but his letter was intercepted and never reached its intended recipients. Hughes himself disappeared shortly after writing the letter, and his body was later found in a river 20 miles from the estate. The Blackwood family's criminal activities reached their peak during the 1880s under the leadership of Virginia's son, Nathaniel Blackwood, who had inherited both the family's wealth and their dark traditions. Nathaniel's journals described his belief that the approaching turn of the century required increasingly elaborate rituals to ensure the family's continued prosperity in the new era. His plans involved expanding the underground chambers and increasing the frequency of ceremonial sacrifices. However, Nathaniel's ambitions ultimately led to the family's downfall. His decision to target members of more prominent local families, believing that higher status victims would provide greater spiritual power, brought the kind of attention that the family's operation could not withstand. When Margaret Hutchinson, daughter of a wealthy merchant family, disappeared after attending a dinner party at Blackwood Manor in September 1889, her father's demand for a thorough investigation could not be dismissed or deflected through the family's usual influence. The investigation into Margaret Hutchinson's disappearance was conducted by Detective William Porter from the state capitol, who was immune to the local corruption that had protected the Blackwood family for decades. Porter's systematic approach to gathering evidence, his interviews with longtime residents who had previously been afraid to speak, and his discovery of physical evidence linking the Blackwoods to multiple disappearances, created a case that even the family's wealth and influence could not overcome. The dramatic conclusion of the Blackwood family's reign of terror came in November 1889, when Detective Porter obtained a warrant to search the manor grounds. Anticipating his investigation, Nathaniel Blackwood had attempted to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses who could testify against the family. The resulting fire that consumed the main house was intended to cover the family's escape, but instead trapped Nathaniel and his immediate family in the burning structure, ending their criminal dynasty in the same flames meant to conceal their crimes. The underground chambers, protected from the fire by their stone construction, preserved the evidence that would eventually expose the full scope of the Blackwood family's activities. However, the political and social implications of revealing such extensive criminal activity conducted by a prominent family led authorities to classify the investigation and suppress public disclosure of the findings. For over 30 years, the true story of the Blackwood family remained buried in confidential files, known only to a small circle of investigators and government officials. The systematic nature of the Blackwood family's criminal enterprise became clear through the discovery of what investigators would later term the selection protocols, a detailed methodology for identifying, evaluating, and acquiring victims that had been refined across 3 generations of the family's dark practice. These protocols, meticulously documented in leather-bound ledgers found within the underground chambers, revealed an operation of chilling efficiency that operated under the guise of Southern hospitality and Christian charity. Cornelius Blackwood had established the foundational principles of victim selection during the 1850s, developing criteria that prioritized both the spiritual value he believed different types of people possessed for ritual purposes and the practical consideration of minimizing the risk of discovery. His classification system divided potential victims into categories based on what he termed their spiritual potency and their social vulnerability, with detailed instructions for approaching each type without arousing suspicion. The highest value targets, according to Cornelius's writings, were young people between the ages of 16 and 25, who possessed what he described as pure life force, unmarked by the corruption of adult experience. These individuals were typically approached through the family's extensive social connections, invited to extended stays at the manor under pretenses of courtship, employment opportunities, or educational advancement. The isolated location of the estate ensured that once these victims arrived, their disappearance could be easily explained as sudden departures or travel to distant relatives. Eleanor Blackwood had specialized in the recruitment of female victims through her charitable work and social activities. Her personal correspondence revealed a sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation, as she identified women who were emotionally vulnerable due to recent losses, financial difficulties, or social isolation. She would offer these women positions as household staff, companions for elderly relatives, or participation in exclusive charitable organizations that required residence at the manor during training periods. The process by which the Blackwood family maintained their victim supply while avoiding detection required careful coordination with local institutions and community leaders who either actively participated in their conspiracy or remained willfully ignorant of obvious patterns. Sheriff Thomas Mitchell's cooperation proved essential to this operation, as his control over missing person investigations allowed the family to operate with virtual impunity for over 2 decades. Mitchell's own journals discovered during the courthouse renovation provided insight into the corruption that enabled the Blackwood operation. The sheriff received monthly payments from the family totaling more than twice his official salary, along with promises of political advancement and threats of exposure for his own criminal activities. In exchange, Mitchell ensured that reports of missing persons were either never officially filed or were quickly closed due to lack of evidence. The family's relationship with local religious institutions extended far beyond simple financial donations, encompassing a complex network of spiritual manipulation that provided both cover for their activities and a source of potential victims. Reverend James Crawford's cooperation with the Blackwoods involved more than passive complicity, as his sermons were carefully crafted to identify congregants who might serve the family's purposes, while discouraging community members from asking questions about local disappearances. Crawford's theological justifications for his cooperation, detailed in private letters to his brother in South Carolina, revealed the intellectual framework that allowed him to reconcile his participation in murder with his religious beliefs. He had convinced himself that the Blackwood rituals served a divine purpose in purifying the community of undesirable elements, and that the victims' deaths were sacrifices necessary for the greater good of the faithful congregation. The underground chambers beneath the manor had been constructed in phases, with each generation of the family expanding and refining the facilities to better serve their ritualistic purposes. The original chambers, built by Cornelius in the late 1840s, consisted of simple holding cells and a basic ceremonial space carved directly into the bedrock beneath the house foundation. These primitive facilities could accommodate only a few victims at a time and provided minimal security against escape attempts. Virginia Blackwood's architectural modifications during the 1870s transformed the underground complex into a sophisticated facility designed for long-term captivity and elaborate ceremonial procedures. She commissioned the construction of additional chambers, connected by a network of tunnels that extended beneath the entire manor grounds, creating separate areas for victim preparation, ritual storage, and the disposal of remains. The central ceremonial chamber represented the pinnacle of Virginia's architectural vision for the family's ritual space. The black granite altar, imported at enormous expense from Scotland, was positioned according to astronomical calculations that aligned the chamber with specific celestial events that the family believed enhanced the power of their rituals. Surrounding the altar, carved stone channels directed the flow of blood from sacrificial victims into collection vessels used in subsequent ceremonies. The victim preparation areas revealed the methodical approach the family employed to maximize the psychological and spiritual impact of their rituals. Separate chambers housed victims according to their intended ceremonial roles, with different treatment protocols designed to induce specific mental states that the family believed enhanced their spiritual value. Some victims were kept in complete darkness to heighten their terror, while others were subjected to constant illumination to prevent sleep and break down their psychological defenses. Virginia's innovations in victim management included the development of what she termed conditioning protocols, systematic methods of psychological manipulation designed to transform captives into willing participants in their own destruction. These protocols involved cycles of kindness and cruelty calculated to create emotional dependency on their captors, making victims grateful for small mercies and increasingly willing to cooperate with their captors' demands. The family's record-keeping system extended beyond simple documentation of their criminal activities to include detailed genealogical research on their victims, reflecting their belief that the spiritual power gained from sacrifice was influenced by the victim's ancestry and bloodline. Eleanor Blackwood maintained extensive files on local families, tracing lineages back multiple generations to identify individuals who possessed what she considered spiritually significant heritage. These genealogical records revealed the family's particular interest in targeting descendants of Native American tribes, believing that indigenous blood possessed unique spiritual properties that enhanced their rituals. The systematic targeting of individuals with Native American ancestry represented a calculated campaign of ethnic violence disguised as occult practice, with entire family lines eliminated over the course of several decades. The Blackwood family's expansion of their criminal activities during the Civil War period demonstrated their ability to adapt their methods to changing circumstances while maintaining their core objectives. The chaos and displacement of wartime provided unprecedented opportunities for victim acquisition, as refugees, deserters, and displaced persons could disappear without generating the kind of community attention that peacetime disappearances might attract. Nathaniel Blackwood's assumption of leadership during the post-war period marked a significant escalation in both the scale and sophistication of the family's operation. His additions to the underground complex included specialized chambers for different types of rituals, advanced ventilation systems to eliminate odors that might attract attention, and mechanical devices designed to facilitate the restraint and torture of victims during ceremonial procedures. The mechanical innovations developed by Nathaniel reflected his engineering background and his belief that technological advancement could enhance the spiritual power of traditional ritual practices. His designs included hydraulic mechanisms for positioning victims during ceremonies, pulley systems for suspended torture, and precisely calibrated devices for controlling the rate at which victims died during sacrifice rituals. Perhaps most disturbing was Nathaniel's development of what he termed the regeneration protocol, a systematic approach to using single victims for multiple ceremonial purposes through careful management of torture and injury. This protocol allowed the family to extract maximum spiritual value from each victim while prolonging their suffering over extended periods, sometimes lasting weeks or months before the final sacrificial ceremony. The family's financial records, maintained with the same meticulous attention to detail as their ritual documentation, revealed the enormous costs associated with their criminal enterprise and the sophisticated money laundering operation required to conceal these expenditures. Construction costs for the underground facilities, payments to corrupted officials, and expenses for acquiring specialized equipment and materials represented a significant portion of the family's annual income. These financial records also documented the family's belief that their ritual practices directly contributed to their business success, with detailed correlations between ceremonial activities and subsequent improvements in their plantation yields, railroad investments, and other commercial ventures. The family maintained careful records of market performance following specific rituals, convinced that their sacrificial practices provided supernatural assistance in their financial endeavors. The corruption network that enabled the Blackwood operation extended throughout the region's political and business establishment, encompassing judges, legislators, business leaders, and even federal officials who received regular payments in exchange for their cooperation or silence. This network represented a shadow government that controlled law enforcement, influenced judicial proceedings, and manipulated business regulations to protect the family's interests. Local business leaders who participated in this corruption network included plantation owners who provided workers for the family's selection, railroad executives who facilitated the transportation of victims and disposal of evidence, and merchants who supplied specialized equipment for the family's underground facilities. These business relationships created a web of mutual dependence that made exposure of the Blackwood operation a threat to the entire regional power structure. The ritualistic ceremonies conducted by the Blackwood family revealed themselves through forensic examination to be far more elaborate and systematic than initial investigations had suggested. Archaeological analysis of the ceremonial chambers uncovered evidence of practices that combined elements from multiple occult traditions, creating a unique form of ritual magic that the family believed granted them supernatural control over their wealth, political influence, and social standing in the community. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, the forensic archaeologist who led the detailed examination of the underground complex in 1924, discovered that the arrangement of the ceremonial spaces followed astronomical principles that aligned specific chambers with celestial events throughout the year. The family had constructed their ritual calendar around solstices, equinoxes, and lunar phases, with different types of ceremonies conducted in different chambers, depending on the astrological significance of the timing. The most elaborate ceremonies took place in what investigators designated as the Grand Chamber, a circular room carved into solid bedrock 30 feet beneath the manor's foundation. This chamber featured a domed ceiling embedded with crystals arranged to mirror constellation patterns, creating a subterranean replica of the night sky that could be illuminated during ceremonies through a complex system of mirrors and oil lamps that Nathaniel Blackwood had engineered. The Grand Chamber's focal point was an octagonal altar constructed from black granite imported from the Scottish Highlands, the same region where the Blackwood family had originated before emigrating to America. Carved into the altar's surface were symbols that linguistic experts eventually identified as a combination of Celtic Ogham script, Germanic runes, and modified alchemical symbols that appeared to represent the family's unique interpretation of traditional European occult practices. Surrounding the central altar, 8 smaller pedestals held ceremonial objects that revealed the complexity of the family's ritual system. Each pedestal was dedicated to what the family's journals describe as a different aspect of temporal power, including wealth accumulation, political influence, social dominance, agricultural prosperity, business success, legal immunity, community, respect, and spiritual authority. The objects placed on these pedestals included ancient artifacts that the family claimed had been passed down through generations, along with items crafted specifically for their American ceremonies. The victim preparation process, reconstructed through examination of the smaller chambers and cross-reference with the family's detailed ceremonial notes, followed protocols that were designed to maximize what the family believed was the spiritual energy extracted from human sacrifice. Different types of victims underwent different preparation procedures based on their intended role in specific ceremonies, with some preparations lasting weeks while others were completed within days of capture. Female victims intended for fertility and prosperity rituals were housed in chambers decorated with symbols representing abundance and growth, fed specific diets intended to purify their bodies, and subjected to daily procedures designed to enhance their spiritual receptivity. These procedures, described in clinical detail in Eleanor Blackwood's ceremonial journals, included forced meditation, exposure to specific combinations of incense and herbs, and physical conditioning designed to heighten their emotional responses during the final ceremony. Male victims selected for power and dominance rituals underwent preparation protocols focused on breaking their will and establishing the family's absolute authority over their existence. These preparations took place in chambers deliberately designed to induce claustrophobia and disorientation, with irregular walls, ceiling heights that prevented standing upright, and lighting systems that created constantly shifting shadows and visual distortions. Children, when they were selected for ceremonial purposes, were subjected to preparation procedures that the family believed enhanced their innocence and spiritual purity. Virginia Blackwood's notes describe these procedures as education in spiritual submission, involving daily lessons in the family's interpretation of cosmic order and their place within divine hierarchy. These lessons were designed to make the children willing participants in their own sacrifice, believing that their deaths would serve a noble purpose in maintaining cosmic balance. The seasonal ceremony schedule followed a pattern that investigators were able to reconstruct through examination of bloodstain patterns, wear marks on ceremonial equipment, and astronomical calculations that matched the family's recorded observations of celestial events. The winter solstice ceremony, conducted in December, was dedicated to ensuring the family's financial prosperity for the coming year, and typically involved the sacrifice of multiple victims whose blood was collected and mixed with precious metals, before being buried in locations throughout the property. Spring equinox ceremonies focused on agricultural prosperity and community influence, involving rituals conducted in chamber sections that connected directly to the estate's garden areas through concealed tunnels. These ceremonies incorporated elements from the property's soil, water from underground springs, and plant materials grown specifically for ritual purposes, creating a direct connection between the family's occult practices and their legitimate agricultural operations. Summer solstice rituals represented the most elaborate ceremonies in the family's annual cycle, designed to maximize their political power and social influence during the period when community activities reached their peak. These ceremonies required the largest number of victims and the most complex preparation procedures, involving multiple phases conducted over several days leading up to the solstice date. The autumn equinox ceremonies serve dual purposes of expressing gratitude for the year's successes and ensuring protection from potential threats to the family's position. These rituals incorporated elements that the family believed would neutralize enemies, deflect investigations, and maintain the loyalty of their corrupted associates throughout the community. Beyond the seasonal ceremonies, the family conducted monthly rituals aligned with lunar phases that focused on specific aspects of their operation requiring supernatural assistance. New moon ceremonies were dedicated to concealing their activities and maintaining secrecy, while full moon rituals focused on enhancing their power over community leaders and business associates who might pose threats to their operation. The family's belief system, reconstructed through their extensive theological writings found in the underground library chamber, represented a unique synthesis of Scottish folk magic, Germanic occultism, and American frontier spiritualism that they had developed over generations of practice. Central to this belief system was the conviction that certain bloodlines possessed inherent spiritual authority that could be enhanced through ritual practice and the absorption of life force from human sacrifice. Cornelius Blackwood's theological writings described his theory of spiritual aristocracy, arguing that families like the Blackwoods were destined by divine mandate to rule over lesser humans who existed primarily to serve as sources of spiritual energy for their betters. This theory provided the moral justification for their criminal activities, framing murder as a form of spiritual taxation owed by inferior humans to their divinely appointed superiors. The family's library of occult texts, discovered in a climate-controlled chamber designed to preserve ancient manuscripts, included works dating back several centuries that they claimed had been inherited from European ancestors. These texts, written in Latin, Gaelic, and medieval German, provided the theoretical foundation for rituals that the family had adapted to American conditions and their specific goals of maintaining wealth and power. Virginia Blackwood had significantly expanded this occult library during her European travels in the 1860s, acquiring manuscripts from private collectors and occult societies that provided new techniques for enhancing the power of their rituals. Her additions to the family's ceremonial practices included elements from Eastern European vampiric traditions, Mediterranean mystery cults, and Northern European shamanic practices that she believed would complement their existing Scottish foundation. The most disturbing discovery in the family's occult library was a collection of detailed anatomical studies that Virginia had commissioned from corrupt medical professionals, designed to identify the most effective methods for extracting maximum spiritual energy from human victims. These studies included precise diagrams of ceremonial cutting techniques, optimal timing for different phases of sacrifice rituals, and methods for prolonging consciousness during the dying process to enhance spiritual extraction. Nathaniel Blackwood's contributions to the family's ritual system reflected his engineering background and his belief that technological innovation could enhance traditional occult practices. His mechanical devices for ceremony enhancement included precision-calibrated restraint systems that positioned victims according to astronomical alignments, hydraulic mechanisms that controlled the rate of blood flow during sacrifice, and acoustic systems that amplified victim vocalizations to enhance the psychological impact on other captives. The family's record-keeping system for ceremonial activities demonstrated their conviction that spiritual power could be measured and quantified like any other form of energy. Detailed logs recorded the spiritual yield obtained from different types of victims, the effectiveness of various ritual modifications, and correlations between ceremonial activities and subsequent improvements in their worldly affairs. These ceremonial logs revealed that the family had developed a complex scoring system for evaluating the spiritual value of potential victims based on factors including age, physical condition, emotional state, ancestry, and previous life experiences. Victims who scored highest on their evaluation criteria were reserved for the most important ceremonies, while those with lower scores were used for routine monthly rituals or practice sessions for younger family members learning ceremonial procedures. The indoctrination process by which new generations of Blackwood children were introduced to the family's criminal activities followed carefully planned stages designed to gradually acclimate them to increasingly disturbing activities. Young children began by observing minor ceremonies from concealed locations, progressing to direct participation in victim selection and preparation, before ultimately conducting their own sacrificial rituals under adult supervision. Nathaniel Blackwood's journals describe his own initiation into the family tradition at age 12, when he was required to assist in the preparation of a female victim selected for a spring prosperity ritual. His detailed account of this experience revealed the psychological conditioning techniques used to normalize murder and torture for children born into the family, making their participation in these activities seem natural and necessary rather than criminal and immoral. The family's expansion of their criminal network during the 1870s and 1880s involved establishing connections with similar occult practitioners throughout the southeastern United States, creating a regional confederation of wealthy families engaged in ritual murder for supernatural enhancement of their power and prosperity. These connections were maintained through coded correspondence, shared ceremonial techniques, and occasional exchanges of victims between different family operations. Virginia Blackwood's correspondence with families in Louisiana, South Carolina, and Alabama revealed the existence of a sophisticated network that coordinated ceremonial schedules to avoid conflicts, shared innovations in ritual technology, and provided mutual support for members facing potential exposure or investigation. This network represented a shadow aristocracy that operated parallel to legitimate Southern society while pursuing goals that required systematic violation of every moral and legal standard. The business enterprises that provided cover for the family's criminal activities became increasingly integrated with their occult practices as successive generations refined their methods for using supernatural enhancement to achieve worldly success. Their plantation operations, railroad investments, and banking interests all incorporated ritual elements designed to ensure prosperity through supernatural means, rather than relying solely on conventional business practices. Financial records discovered in the underground chambers documented the family's belief that their ritual activities provided measurable returns on investment, with detailed calculations correlating ceremonial expenses with subsequent business profits. These records showed that the family allocated approximately 30% of their annual income to supporting their occult activities, viewing this expenditure as essential for maintaining their competitive advantage in legitimate business ventures. The corruption network that protected the Blackwood operation had evolved by the 1880s into a comprehensive system that controlled virtually every aspect of law enforcement, judicial proceedings, and political decision-making throughout the region. This network included officials at state and federal levels who received regular payments in exchange for their cooperation in suppressing investigations and protecting the family from legal consequences. Judge Harrison Caldwell, who presided over the Regional Circuit Court from 1875 to 1890, maintained private records that documented his cooperation with the Blackwood family in dismissing charges, manipulating legal proceedings, and ensuring that potential whistleblowers faced harassment and intimidation through official channels. Caldwell's cooperation was secured through a combination of financial payments, blackmail involving his own criminal activities, and his genuine belief in the family's theories about spiritual aristocracy and natural hierarchy. The investigation that would ultimately expose the Blackwood family's decades of ritualistic murder began not through law enforcement initiative, but through the persistent efforts of Catherine Morrison, a young seamstress from nearby Millerville who refused to accept the official explanation for her sister's disappearance. Catherine's determination to find the truth about what had happened to her sister, Emily, would set in motion a chain of events that would finally bring justice to the victims of the Blackwood dynasty. Emily Morrison had vanished in March of 1888. After accepting an invitation to work as a seamstress at Blackwood Manor, a position that Eleanor Blackwood had offered during one of her charitable visits to the Methodist Church in Millerville. Emily had been excited about the opportunity, as the Blackwood family was known throughout the region for their wealth and respectability, and the position promised both good wages and the possibility of learning advanced needlework techniques from Eleanor's European-trained household staff. When Emily failed to return home after her scheduled 2-week trial period, Catherine attempted to visit the manor to inquire about her sister's status. She was informed by the household manager that Emily had suddenly departed for Charleston to accept a position with a wealthy family there, taking only her personal belongings and leaving no forwarding address. This explanation seemed plausible to most people in the community, as young women often sought better opportunities in larger cities. But Catherine knew her sister well enough to recognize the implausibility of such an impulsive decision. Catherine's initial attempts to investigate her sister's disappearance through official channels proved frustratingly ineffective. Sheriff Mitchell dismissed her concerns, insisting that Emily had simply chosen to pursue opportunities elsewhere without informing her family, a common occurrence among young people seeking independence. When Catherine pressed for more detailed investigation, Mitchell became hostile, warning her that continued harassment of respected community members, like the Blackwood family, could result in legal consequences for her. Undeterred by official intimidation, Catherine began conducting her own investigation into her sister's disappearance. She spoke with other families in the region whose members had vanished under similar circumstances, discovering a pattern of disappearances that stretched back over decades and consistently involved some connection to the Blackwood family or their associates. Her systematic documentation of these cases revealed correlations that had never been officially investigated, despite their obvious significance. The breakthrough in Catherine's investigation came through her friendship with Marcus Webb, a young blacksmith who had been commissioned to create specialized metalwork for various prominent families in the region. Marcus revealed that he had received unusual requests from the Blackwood family for items that seemed to have no legitimate purpose, including heavy iron restraints, ceremonial blades with specific dimensional requirements, and mechanical devices that appeared designed for restraining human beings. Marcus's detailed records of his work for the Blackwood family, maintained for billing purposes, provided Catherine with evidence of purchases that could only be explained by criminal activity. The quantities and specifications of restraint devices ordered by the family far exceeded any legitimate security needs, while the ceremonial items corresponded to descriptions Catherine had found in occult texts. During her research into possible explanations for the disappearances, Catherine's investigation expanded when she gained the cooperation of David Foster, a former groundskeeper at Blackwood Manor who had been dismissed from his position after witnessing activities that Nathaniel Blackwood deemed too sensitive for outside observation. Foster had been reluctant to speak about his experiences at the manor, fearing retaliation from the powerful family, but Catherine's evidence of a systematic pattern of disappearances convinced him to share what he had witnessed. During his employment, Foster's testimony provided the first eyewitness account of the Blackwood family's criminal activities from someone who had observed their operation from within. He described seeing victims being transported to the manor under cover of darkness, hearing screams and other disturbing sounds emanating from beneath the main house, and witnessing the disposal of human remains in remote areas of the estate property. His account also included details about the underground tunnel system and the existence of hidden chambers that guests and official visitors never saw. The most significant revelation in Foster's testimony concerned the night of Emily Morrison's disappearance. He had witnessed Emily being escorted to the basement areas of the manor by Eleanor Blackwood and had later seen Nathaniel emerging from the underground chambers carrying bloodied clothing that he burned in the estate's furnace. Foster's detailed description of events provided Catherine with confirmation that her sister had been murdered by the Blackwood family. Armed with Foster's testimony and the evidence she had gathered through months of investigation, Catherine approached Detective William Porter, the state investigator who had recently been assigned to the region, following complaints about local law enforcement corruption. Porter had already begun investigating irregularities in Sheriff Mitchell's handling of missing person cases and was receptive to Catherine's evidence of a systematic pattern of criminal activity. Porter's investigation into the Blackwood family benefited from his outsider status and his immunity to the local corruption networks that had protected the family for decades. His methodical approach to gathering evidence included interviews with witnesses who had previously been afraid to speak, examination of financial records that revealed suspicious patterns of expenditure, and coordination with other law enforcement agencies to trace connections between local disappearances and missing person cases in neighboring jurisdictions. The expansion of Porter's investigation revealed that the Blackwood family's criminal network extended far beyond their local operation, encompassing associates in multiple states who facilitated victim acquisition, evidence disposal, and official cover-ups. Bank records obtained through federal court orders showed regular transfers of substantial sums to officials throughout the region, while correspondence seized from associates' homes documented coordination of criminal activities across state lines. Porter's investigation gained momentum when he secured the cooperation of Reverend James Crawford, whose participation in the Blackwood conspiracy had been discovered through examination of church financial records. Facing prosecution for his role in facilitating the disappearances of numerous congregation members, Crawford agreed to provide detailed testimony about the family's operation in exchange for reduced charges. Crawford's testimony revealed the sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques the family employed to identify and recruit victims from the local religious community. He described how Eleanor Blackwood would attend church services and charity events specifically to observe potential victims, evaluating their emotional vulnerability, social isolation, and likelihood of being missed if they disappeared. Crawford admitted to providing Eleanor with detailed information about congregation members' personal circumstances, family situations, and psychological states that helped her select optimal targets. The Reverend's cooperation also provided Porter with access to church records that documented the systematic targeting of specific families and individuals over multiple generations. These records showed that the Blackwood family had maintained detailed genealogical information about local residents, tracking bloodlines and family histories to identify individuals who met their specific criteria for ritual purposes. Porter's investigation uncovered evidence that the Blackwood family's selection of victims followed patterns that corresponded to their occult calendar and ceremonial requirements. Analysis of disappearance dates revealed correlations with astronomical events, seasonal transitions, and lunar phases that matched the timing requirements described in occult texts found during searches of associates' properties. The detectives' persistence in pursuing physical evidence led to the discovery of burial sites throughout the Blackwood estate where victims' remains had been disposed of according to ritual specifications. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by federal investigators located dozens of burial sites, arranged in patterns that corresponded to the astronomical alignments found in the underground ceremonial chambers. Forensic examination of these burial sites provided definitive proof of the systematic murder that had taken place at Blackwood Manor over multiple decades. The positioning of remains, evidence of ritualistic mutilation, and artifacts buried, with victims confirmed that the disappearances had involved organized ceremonial murder rather than random criminal violence. Porter's investigation also revealed the existence of detailed photographic documentation that Nathaniel Blackwood had maintained of the family's ceremonial activities. These photographs, discovered in a hidden vault within the manor's library, provided visual evidence of ritual murders and showed the elaborate ceremonial procedures that victims had been subjected to before their deaths. The photographs documented the progression of individual ceremonies from victim preparation through final sacrifice, revealing the systematic nature of the torture and murder that had been conducted under the guise of spiritual practice. The images also showed the participation of multiple family members and associates in these activities, providing evidence of a broad conspiracy that extended throughout the local community's leadership. As Porter's investigation expanded, the scope of official corruption that had enabled the Blackwood operation became increasingly apparent. Financial records obtained through federal subpoenas revealed that judges, prosecutors, law enforcement officials, and political leaders throughout the region had received regular payments from the family in exchange for their cooperation, suppressing investigations and protecting the family from legal consequences. The investigation uncovered evidence that several prominent state officials had direct knowledge of the Blackwood family's criminal activities, but had chosen to ignore this information in exchange for political support and financial benefits. Letters found in Nathaniel Blackwood's personal correspondence revealed that he had maintained detailed files on the criminal activities and personal indiscretions of numerous officials, using this information to ensure their continued cooperation. Through blackmail when financial incentives proved insufficient. Porter's methodical documentation of the corruption network revealed a shadow government that had operated parallel to legitimate authority structures throughout the region. This network had controlled law enforcement responses to missing person reports, influenced judicial proceedings to protect family associates, and manipulated political processes to ensure that investigations never reached levels where they might threaten the family's operation. The turning point in Porter's investigation came when he obtained cooperation from Alice Henderson, Eleanor Blackwood's personal maid, who had witnessed numerous aspects of the family's criminal activities during her 12 years of employment at the manor. Henderson's testimony provided detailed descriptions of the victim preparation procedures, the ceremonial activities conducted in the underground chambers, and the disposal methods used for victims' remains. Henderson's account revealed that she had been forced to participate in various aspects of the family's operation, under threat of becoming a victim herself if she attempted to leave their employment or report their activities to authorities. Her testimony described the psychological control techniques the family used to ensure the loyalty and silence of household staff, who inevitably witnessed aspects of their criminal enterprise. The maid's cooperation provided Porter with access to the manor's interior spaces and detailed knowledge of the hidden passages and concealed chambers that comprised the family's operational infrastructure. Her guidance enabled investigators to locate evidence that had been carefully concealed from previous cursory inspections, including the entrance to the primary underground ceremonial complex. Henderson's testimony also revealed that Nathaniel Blackwood had become increasingly unstable and paranoid as his father's generation passed away, and responsibility for maintaining the family's criminal enterprise fell primarily to him, she described. His growing conviction that enemies were closing in on the family operation, and his increasingly desperate attempts to eliminate potential witnesses and destroy incriminating evidence. The psychological pressure of maintaining the family's criminal operation while presenting a respectable public facade had taken a severe toll on Nathaniel's mental stability. Henderson described episodes of violent rage, periods of delusional thinking, and an increasing obsession with conducting ever more elaborate and frequent ceremonial murders to maintain what he believed was supernatural protection for the family. As Porter's investigation approached its climax, Nathaniel Blackwood's awareness of the growing threat to his family's operation led him to implement desperate measures designed to eliminate evidence and silence potential witnesses. His actions during this period would ultimately precipitate the dramatic conclusion that brought the Blackwood dynasty's reign of terror to its violent end, while ensuring that the full scope of their crimes would be preserved for future investigation and justice. Part 5. Resolution and Impact. The final confrontation at Blackwood Manor occurred on the night of November 15, 1889, when Detective William Porter arrived with federal marshals and a court-authorized search warrant that Nathaniel Blackwood's remaining corrupt allies could no longer prevent or delay. The warrant, obtained through federal courts to circumvent local corruption, authorized a comprehensive search of the estate grounds and all structures, including any underground facilities that investigation had suggested might exist beneath the main house. Nathaniel Blackwood's response to the impending search revealed the depths of his psychological deterioration and his willingness to employ extreme measures to protect the family's criminal legacy. Rather than submit to investigation that would inevitably expose decades of ritual murder, he chose to implement what his personal journals later revealed had been a carefully planned destruction protocol designed to eliminate all evidence of the family's activities while ensuring that their occult knowledge would not fall into what he considered unworthy hands. The destruction protocol involved setting simultaneous fires throughout the manor, using accelerants that Nathaniel had strategically positioned over several weeks as he sensed the investigation closing in around his family. His plan called for the complete destruction of the main house, the underground ceremonial chambers, and all documentation of the family's ritual practices, while creating conditions that would prevent investigators from recovering evidence that could be used to prosecute surviving family members or associates. However, Nathaniel's implementation of the destruction protocol contained a fatal miscalculation that would ultimately ensure the preservation of evidence rather than its elimination. His decision to detonate explosive charges in the underground chambers to ensure their complete destruction instead created structural collapses that sealed large sections of the complex, protecting crucial evidence from the fires that consumed the upper levels of the manor. The explosions that rocked Blackwood Manor on that November night were heard for miles throughout the surrounding countryside, drawing volunteers and curious onlookers who arrived to find the grand estate engulfed in flames that would burn for 3 days before being completely extinguished. Nathaniel, his wife Margaret, and their 2 teenage children perished in the conflagration, trapped in the underground chambers by the very explosions that were meant to ensure their escape and concealment. Detective Porter's investigation of the manor ruins began while sections of the building were still smoldering, driven by his determination to recover evidence before it could be further damaged or destroyed. The structural damage caused by Nathaniel's explosives had actually facilitated access to the underground complex by creating openings that revealed the extent of the hidden chambers that had remained concealed from all previous inspections. The preserved sections of the underground complex yielded evidence that exceeded even Porter's expectations for documenting the scope of the Blackwood family's criminal enterprise. Sealed chambers contained intact ceremonial altars, preserved human remains, detailed ritual implements, and extensive documentation that provided comprehensive proof of systematic ritual murder conducted over multiple generations. The recovery of Nathaniel Blackwood's personal journals from a fireproof safe in the deepest section of the underground complex provided investigators with unprecedented insight into the psychological framework that had sustained the family's criminal activities. His writings revealed not only detailed descriptions of specific murders and ceremonial procedures, but also his theories about the supernatural benefits that these activities provided to the family's worldly enterprises. Alice Henderson's survival of the manor fire, despite being present during Nathaniel's final desperate actions, provided investigators with a living witness who could testify to the family's activities and guide the recovery of evidence from the underground chambers. Her detailed knowledge of the complex's layout enabled investigators to locate chambers and passages that might otherwise have remained hidden despite the structural damage caused by the explosions. Henderson's testimony during the subsequent legal proceedings provided crucial, first-hand evidence that corroborated the physical evidence recovered from the underground chambers. Her descriptions of ceremonial activities, victim preparation procedures, and the family's belief system helped prosecutors construct a comprehensive case that documented not only the murders themselves but also the systematic conspiracy that had enabled them to continue for decades. The legal proceedings that followed the exposure of the Blackwood family's crimes represented the largest criminal conspiracy case prosecuted in Georgia during the 19th century, involving charges against more than 30 individuals who had participated in or facilitated the family's operation. Federal prosecutors pursued charges under multiple jurisdictions due to evidence that the conspiracy had involved criminal activities across state lines and federal corruption. Judge Harrison Caldwell's suicide on the eve of his scheduled testimony eliminated one of the key figures in the corruption network, but his private papers, seized before his death, provided evidence that implicated numerous other officials throughout the regional power structure. These documents revealed the extent to which respected institutions and prominent families had been complicit in covering up evidence of systematic murder. Sheriff Thomas Mitchell's conviction and life imprisonment sent a clear message that law enforcement corruption would no longer be tolerated, while the prosecution of numerous business leaders and political figures demonstrated that wealth and social position would not protect those who had enabled criminal activities. The trials resulted in prison sentences for 23 individuals, with additional civil penalties that bankrupted several families who had profited from their association with the Blackwood operation. Catherine Morrison's role in initiating the investigation that exposed the Blackwood conspiracy earned her recognition as a pioneer in victim advocacy and criminal justice reform. Her systematic documentation of disappearances and her persistence in demanding official investigation despite intimidation and official obstruction provided a model for future efforts to hold authorities accountable for properly investigating missing person cases. The Catherine Morrison Foundation, established in 1895 with funds recovered from the Blackwood estate, became a leading advocate for missing person investigations and provided support for families seeking justice in cases where local authorities had proven unwilling or unable to conduct adequate investigations. The Foundation's work contributed to reforms in law enforcement procedures and legal protections for whistleblowers who reported official corruption. Emily Morrison's remains, identified among those recovered from the Blackwood estate burial sites, were finally returned to her family for proper burial in the Millerville Methodist Cemetery. The memorial service, attended by hundreds of community members, became a symbol of justice for all the victims whose disappearances had been ignored or covered up by corrupt officials. The archaeological investigation of the Blackwood estate continued for several years after the initial discovery, ultimately documenting evidence of more than 200 murders conducted over the family's 4 decades of criminal activity. The systematic nature of the documentation recovered from the underground chambers enabled investigators to identify many victims whose disappearances had never been officially reported or investigated. Dr. Margaret Foster's genealogical research expanded to include the victims identified through the Blackwood investigation, revealed the devastating impact that the family's crimes had on the regional population. Entire family lines had been eliminated through the systematic targeting of individuals with specific ancestry, while the fear generated by unexplained disappearances had driven many families to relocate to areas they considered safer. The Blackwood case contributed to significant reforms in law enforcement oversight and judicial accountability that extended far beyond Georgia's borders. Federal legislation passed in response to the corruption revealed during the investigation established mechanisms for independent oversight of local law enforcement and provided protection for citizens reporting official misconduct. The preservation of the Blackwood estate as a historical site ensured that future generations would have access to physical evidence of the crimes that had been committed there. The underground chambers, stabilized and converted into a memorial and educational facility, serve as a reminder of the importance of vigilance in protecting vulnerable populations from exploitation and abuse. Educational programs developed for the memorial site focus on the warning signs of institutional corruption and the importance of citizen advocacy in ensuring justice for victims of crime. The site receives thousands of visitors annually, including law enforcement professionals, legal scholars, and community advocates who study the case as an example of how systematic criminal activity can be concealed through corruption and intimidation. The academic study of the Blackwood case has contributed to understanding of how religious and occult beliefs can be used to justify criminal activity, while also examining the social and economic factors that enabled wealthy families to operate above the law in rural communities. Scholarly research based on the case has influenced criminal justice policy and victim advocacy practices throughout the United States. The long-term impact of exposing the Blackwood conspiracy extended beyond the immediate legal consequences, to include fundamental changes in how missing person cases are investigated and how communities respond to patterns of unexplained disappearances. The case established legal precedents for federal intervention in cases where local corruption prevents adequate investigation of serious crimes. Contemporary law enforcement agencies continue to study the Blackwood case as an example of how persistent individual advocacy can overcome institutional corruption and bring justice to victims whose cases had been deliberately ignored. Catherine Morrison's investigative methods and her refusal to accept official explanations that contradicted available evidence provide a model for modern victim advocacy efforts. The memorial established at the Blackwood estate site honors not only the identified victims of the family's crimes, but also the unknown number of people whose disappearances were never properly investigated due to official corruption and community intimidation. The memorial's inscription emphasizes the importance of protecting vulnerable populations and maintaining accountability in institutions entrusted with public safety. Today, the Blackwood case serves as a powerful reminder that justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied, and that determined individuals can overcome systematic corruption when they refuse to accept official indifference to criminal activity. The case demonstrates that even the most powerful criminal conspiracies can be exposed when citizens demand accountability and refuse to be intimidated by threats or official obstruction. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.